Deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, where ancient trees stretch endlessly toward a darkened sky, there are stories that refuse to be forgotten. Stories whispered around campfires, passed down through generations, and carried on the cold night wind. These are not just tales, they are real encounters. Chilling moments experienced by those brave or foolish enough to venture deep into these haunted woods. Tonight, you'll hear 12 such true encounters. Each one is a window into a world where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, where shadows hold secrets, and where the past reaches out to those who dare to listen. From restless spirits that roam the hollows, to curses that twist lives beyond recognition, these stories will grip you, disturb you, and haunt you long after the final word is spoken. If you hunger for horror that feels raw and real, stories that burrow under your skin and stay with you in the silence, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Farcical Fears now, and turn on notifications so you never miss a descent into the darkness. Because here, the mountains are watching, and the fears we uncover are far from fiction. Let's move to our first story. My name is Caleb, and I came to the Appalachian Mountains, searching for solitude, a break from the chaos of city life. What I found instead was something that changed me forever, something I still don't fully understand. 6 months ago, I moved into a small, weathered cabin tucked away miles from the nearest road, deep in the forest. I thought the quiet would heal me, but the silence quickly turned into something far more sinister. The first few nights passed without incident. The forest was alive with natural sounds: crickets, owls, the rustle of leaves. But then the whispers started. At first, I told myself it was the wind playing tricks, a faint murmur slipping between the trees, like voices just beyond hearing. But soon, those whispers became more distinct. They weren't random sounds. They were deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. And they always said my name. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was my imagination, exhaustion, or the isolation getting to me. But every night, the whispers crept closer, growing louder and more insistent. Sometimes, they seemed to circle the cabin, coming from all directions at once. I began to dread nighttime, the moments when the voices began their haunting song. Sleep became impossible. I found myself pacing the wooden floor, gripping a flashlight, eyes darting toward the windows that showed only dark woods, stretching endlessly beyond. Days blurred together. The forest outside remained ominously still, as if it held its breath. One afternoon, while exploring the perimeter, I stumbled upon something strange. A large oak tree with carvings etched deep into its bark. The patterns were intricate spirals, lines intertwined in an ancient design that felt wrong, out of place. I had no idea what they meant, but something about them sent a cold shiver down my spine. That night, the whispers returned, but now they weren't just calling my name, they were speaking words I couldn't understand, urgent and desperate. The voices seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. They echoed in my head, invading my thoughts, until I felt I had no refuge even inside my own mind. I started keeping a journal, desperate to hold on to reality. I wrote every whisper, every shadow, every fleeting glimpse of something just beyond sight. The entries grew frantic, the handwriting messy and uneven as my nerves frayed. The forest was no longer just a place, had become a presence, watching and waiting. I was losing control. One evening, overwhelmed by fear and confusion, I followed the whispers deep into the woods. The air grew thick and cold, the familiar sounds of birds and insects gone silent. Branches clawed at my clothes, and the moon barely pierced the heavy canopy above. The voices guided me to a clearing, where an ancient stone lay half buried in moss and dirt. The same strange carvings from the tree were etched into its surface, faintly glowing under the moonlight. As I reached out to touch the stone, a jolt of icy pain shot through my fingers. Suddenly, my mind exploded with faces of people long gone, twisted in fear and despair. Dark figures moving through the trees, lost souls trapped in a nightmare. The stone held the memories of those who had vanished in the forest, bound to the land by some terrible curse. When I came to, I was alone in the clearing. The whispers had stopped, but I felt their weight pressing down on me, an invisible chain binding me to this place. From that night on, the haunting worsened. The voices were louder, no longer whispers but full sentences, warnings and pleas. The shadows in my cabin shifted and morphed into shapes I dared not name. Sleep was a distant memory. I reached out to the locals for answers. At a small town store, I spoke to an old man who looked at me with tired, knowing eyes. He told me stories of the Whispering Hollow, a cursed stretch of forest where people disappeared without a trace, driven mad by voices only they could hear. He warned me not to listen, not to follow the calls, because the forest was alive, hungry, and it never let go. But it was too late for warnings. The forest had chosen me. The whispers seeped into my dreams, pulling me closer to the stone, to whatever dark secret it guarded. I began to see things out of the corner of my eye, figures, watching from the trees, faces pressed against the glass of my windows. I was trapped between two worlds, caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. My journal became my lifeline, a record of my slow unraveling. I wrote about losing hours, waking to find strange symbols scratched into the cabin walls, messages I didn't remember carving. I felt my mind slipping away, overtaken by the voices that now spoke directly inside my head. They promised release, but only if I joined them in the forest's endless night. One final entry remains, scrawled in desperation. If anyone finds this, stay away. The Whispering Hollow is alive. It calls your name and waits to take you. Now, as I write this, the whispers circle me, closer than ever. I know they're coming. The forest doesn't forget, and it won't let me go. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but if you do, beware the woods, the voices, the stones. Some places in the Appalachians don't just hold secrets, they hold souls. Asterisk, the days after that final confrontation with the stone were a haze of exhaustion and terror. The forest no longer felt like a place I could ever leave. It had rooted itself inside me, clawing into my mind, twisting my perception of what was real. Even during daylight, shadows lurked where there should have been light. The whispering voices had transformed from distant murmurs into a constant presence, like a low buzzing just beyond hearing, but always there. I tried to keep busy, wood, fixing the cabin, anything to distract myself from the creeping madness. But the more I fought, the stronger the whispers grew. They mocked me, laughed when I stumbled in the forest, whispered secrets I couldn't understand. Sometimes, I thought I saw figures in the trees, blurred and flickering, like ghosts watching silently as I passed. One afternoon, while collecting water from a nearby stream, I caught sight of a woman standing across the bank. She was pale and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that looked decades out of place. Her eyes met mine, wide and pleading. I called out, but when I blinked, she was gone. My heart raced, and I wondered if exhaustion was finally breaking me. But deep down, I knew she was real, or at least, as real as anything in this cursed place. That night, the whispers formed words again, clearer this time. They spoke of loss, of pain, of a terrible event buried beneath the forest floor. The voices told me that, long ago, a tragedy had stained the land, a massacre, a betrayal, a curse woven by those left behind. The stone in the clearing was a marker, a prison holding restless spirits bound to the earth, unable to move on. I felt a strange pull to return to the clearing, to try to understand what the forest wanted from me. But fear held me back. What if I was becoming one of them? What if the forest's hunger was turning me into something lost, trapped forever in the whispering shadows? One morning, I awoke to find my journal missing. Panic surged through me. How could it vanish overnight? I searched the cabin, the surrounding woods, but it was nowhere. Days later, I found it half buried near the clearing, open to a page I hadn't written. Scrawled in shaky handwriting was a message. They watch. They wait. Do not trust the voices. I had no memory of writing it. Had someone or something taken control of my hand? Isolation warped my sense of time. I lost track of days and nights. Sometimes, I'd catch myself talking aloud, answering the whispers, as if they were old friends. I knew I was slipping, but the alternative, ignoring the voices, felt impossible. They were all I had left. Late one evening, the forest grew unnervingly silent. No rustle of leaves, no animal calls, just an oppressive stillness. Then, from The darkness, a low mournful howl, pierced the night. It was a sound unlike any animal I'd heard, deep, guttural, and filled with sorrow. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I knew then that whatever haunted these woods wasn't just spirits or echoes, it was something older, primal, and angry. I spent that night huddled in my cabin, flashlight shaking in my hand, listening as the howls circled the woods. The whispers faded, replaced by something darker, something watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I understood then that the forest's hunger wasn't for me alone. It was for all who dared to enter, all who heard the call and answered. In the weeks that followed, I tried one last time to leave. Packing my meager belongings, I set out before dawn, determined to escape the shadows. But the forest had other plans. The path I thought I knew twisted and changed beneath my feet, trees shifting like living things. Whispers taunted me from every direction, guiding me deeper into the hollow. Panic rose, cold and sharp, as I realized I was hopelessly lost. When I finally stumbled back to my cabin, exhausted and broken, I knew I was no longer alone. The forest had claimed me. The whispers weren't just voices, they were chains binding me to this place. I understood then that the Appalachians' darkest secret wasn't the stories or the legends. It was the way the woods reached inside your soul and never let go. Now, I write this not as a warning, but as a confession. The forest is alive, hungry, and patient. It watches from the shadows and waits for the next name to call. If you ever hear a whisper in the Appalachian night, if it speaks your name, do not answer. Because some voices lead only to darkness, and some places never let you leave. Let's move to our second story. I still remember the day my life changed forever. The day I discovered a box of old VHS tapes in the attic of my grandmother's abandoned farmhouse near Blackwater Creek. Deep in the Appalachian region, I had come to sort through her belongings after her passing, expecting dusty antiques and faded photographs. But instead, I found something far more disturbing. The tapes, labeled only with dates from the late 1980s, contained footage of my grandmother and a group of friends, documenting strange happenings in the nearby woods and an abandoned mining town no one spoke about anymore. The first tape was grainy and shaky, as if recorded by someone terrified but determined to capture the truth. The footage showed a group of young adults wandering through thick forests, their voices hushed and tense. They spoke about the presence that haunted the ruins of the mining town, a dark force they claimed was responsible for several unexplained disappearances. As I watched, I felt the same unease settle over me, like the camera itself was being watched. The tape's narrative style was raw and fragmented, blending handheld footage with short interviews of the group members, giving a chilling found footage vibe. Each recording became progressively more disturbing, the atmosphere thickening with dread. The voices grew anxious, the images darker. On one tape, they captured a distant silhouette moving between the trees, a figure too tall and distorted to be human. The group tried to follow, but the camera shook violently as frantic whispers filled the audio. By the third tape, the footage became almost unwatchable, distorted and flickering, with sudden blackouts and strange static bursts. Voices whispered over the images, sometimes calling out warnings in a language I didn't understand. It was as if the tapes themselves were alive, haunted by the very presence the group had sought to expose. The narrative thread running through these tapes was that the abandoned mining town, once bustling with life, was cursed. The group believed the mines collapsed years ago had unleashed a malevolent spirit, one that fed on fear and trapped the souls of those who ventured too close. Each member confessed growing paranoia, their mental states unraveling on camera. One of them disappeared halfway through the recordings, his absence leaving a chilling silence in the following clips. As I delved deeper into the footage, I found myself drawn into their terror. The tapes felt like a puzzle, pieces of a story that demanded to be solved, but with every revelation, I felt a growing unease, as if I was awakening something best left asleep. One night, after watching the last tape, I heard a noise outside the farmhouse. The wind whispered through the cracked windows, carrying faint voices that sounded eerily like those on the tapes. I froze, heart pounding, realizing that the presence, documented decades ago, might not be confined to old videotape, might still be here, watching. I know now that some stories don't end when the cameras stop rolling, and some footage should never be found. Asterisk, after that first viewing, I couldn't stop thinking about the tapes. Each one pulled me further into a world I never knew existed, a world my grandmother and her friends had encountered but could never escape. The farmhouse itself felt different somehow, shadows lengthening in corners where none should be, the floorboards creaking when no one was there. I began to realize this wasn't just about old videos. It was about something alive, something watching me now. I spent days cataloging the tapes, noting dates and the people involved. The group was close-knit. My grandmother, who was then in her early 20s, a few childhood friends, and a local history buff named Marcus, who had an obsession with the mining town's tragic past. Marcus's voice often narrated the footage, his tone a mix of excitement and growing dread. The town, long abandoned after the mine collapsed in '72, was rumored to have buried more than just coal-buried secrets and restless spirits. The footage showed the group arriving in the town, their faces bright with curiosity, but shadowed by an unspoken fear. The buildings were skeletal, roofs caved in, windows shattered, swallowed by wild undergrowth. They moved carefully through the ruins, whispering about the disappearances that had plagued the area for years. Hikers, miners, even entire families, who vanished without a trace. One tape caught my breath, a shaky recording of the group standing near the old mine entrance, a yawning black hole in the earth. Suddenly, the camera jerked upward as someone screamed. The audio filled with static, but I could just make out a panicked voice shouting, "It's coming, stay back." The tape cut out shortly after. I found myself imagining what they had seen, what horror had driven them to flee. The feeling of being hunted, watched by something ancient and unforgiving, clung to me. I was no longer just a viewer. I was a participant, drawn into their nightmare. The tapes became more fragmented, chaotic. Scenes of the group setting up makeshift camps, talking nervously around firelight, confessing fears and doubts. Marcus documented strange symbols etched into rocks and trees, symbols similar to those I had seen scratched into the bark around my own cabin. The connection was too strong to ignore. On one tape, a young woman's voice, shaky and trembling, spoke directly to the camera. She described hearing voices calling her name in the night, voices promising freedom if she would just come deeper into the woods. Her eyes darted nervously as shadows danced beyond the firelight. Moments later, the tape showed her standing alone near a tree, staring into the darkness until the camera fell silent. I shivered as I realized how close she had come to the same fate. I feared in my own home. The last few tapes were almost entirely static, interspersed with bursts of haunting images, flickering faces, distorted landscapes, and whispers barely audible beneath the noise. One tape ended with a chilling message scrawled on the screen. "They are still here, watching, waiting." Late one stormy night, the farmhouse seemed to breathe with life. The windows rattled, shadows stretched and twisted, and I heard faint whispers echoing through the halls, the same voices from the tapes. I felt compelled to explore the attic where I had found the tapes, and as I climbed the creaking stairs, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small wooden box, carved with the same strange symbols Marcus had filmed in the ruins. It was locked, but inside was a key, old and rusted, and a letter from my grandmother. Her handwriting was shaky but urgent. She warned me not to trust the tapes, not to follow the voices, and to leave the town and the past alone. But it was too late. The tapes had already claimed me. The night grew colder, the shadows deeper. I knew that whatever had haunted my grandmother and her friends was now watching me, waiting for me to answer the call, to join the silent chorus of the lost. And just like them, I was trapped, caught between the flickering light of the past and the encroaching darkness that threatened to swallow everything. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The tapes play over and over in my mind, the voices grow louder, and the presence draws nearer. If you find this story, heed the warning. Some footage should never be watched, and some secrets buried deep in the Appalachian woods should remain untouched. Because once you look, you can never look away in. Sometimes, the camera never stops rolling. Let's move to our third story. The night I first heard the scratching at my bedroom window, I knew something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just a sound. It was a desperate, frantic noise, like claws scraping against glass, begging to get inside. I live alone in a small town on the edge of the Appalachian wilderness. A place where the nights are thick with shadows and the wind carries old secrets. But nothing in all my years prepared me for what came next. It started a few days before the scratching, strange occurrences I couldn't explain. Objects moved on their own, lights flickered without reason, and a chilling cold seemed to seep through the walls no matter how high I turned up the heat. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew heavier by the hour. One evening, while sitting alone in my living room, I noticed a figure standing just beyond the tree line outside my window. It was tall and thin, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in unnatural ways. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the moonlight like burning coals. When I blinked, it was gone, but the fear it left behind settled deep in my bones. The scratching returned that night, louder and more urgent. I didn't dare look outside, but I could feel its presence pressing against the glass, waiting for an invitation. Sleep was impossible. I barricaded the windows and tried to focus on anything but the growing dread. Over the next week, the entity's influence escalated. I found strange symbols drawn in the dust on my furniture, dark smudges that resembled claw marks appearing on walls, and whispered voices that seemed to echo from empty rooms. My dreams turned into nightmares filled with shadowy figures, cold hands reaching out, and a voice that called my name in a language I couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in Appalachian folklore. She told me about an ancient creature known as the shadow lurker, said to haunt the border between the living world and the spirit realm. According to legend, it preys on those who live too close to the woods, feeding off fear and despair, growing stronger with every terrified heartbeat. I realized then that the scratching at my window wasn't just a random haunting. It was a warning, a demand, a promise that it wouldn't stop until it had claimed me. The creature wasn't just watching it, was waiting for me to break. One night, the scratching turned into pounding, the sound echoing through the house like a storm. I could hear the creature breathing, cold and ragged, just beyond the glass. The lights went out, plunging me into darkness. In that moment, I understood the true horror of what I faced. The shadow lurker was here, and it was hungry. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Every night it comes closer, its presence suffocating and relentless. I've started marking the walls with salt and iron, anything to keep it at bay. But I fear it's only a matter of time before the scratching stops and the shadow steps inside. If you ever hear scratching at your window in the dead of night, don't ignore it. Don't pretend it's just the wind or a stray animal. Because sometimes the shadows aren't empty, and some things waiting outside want more than just a glimpse. They want in. The nights became unbearable. The scratching evolved into a relentless assault, tapping, clawing, pounding against the glass like some ancient beast desperate to tear through the fragile barrier. Every attempt I made to block it out failed. The sound seeped into my bones, echoing in my mind even during the day. I started to hear it when no one else could, a sinister rhythm keeping pace with my heartbeat. Sleep was a distant memory. Each time I closed my eyes, the nightmares flooded back. Shadowy figures looming over my bed. Icy fingers curling around my throat. A guttural voice whispering unintelligible words that filled me with dread. The creature's presence invaded every corner of my life, turning my home, a place that once felt safe, into a prison of terror. I tried to fight back, drawing symbols of protection on my windows, scattering salt around the house, and even hanging iron objects from the walls. For a brief moment, it seemed to slow down, the scratching becoming more hesitant. But that relief was short-lived. One night, the creature spoke not in words, but through a guttural rasping sound that chilled me to my core. It was as if it wanted me to understand. It was ancient, a remnant of a time before the mountains were tamed. A spirit born from the pain and blood spilled in those dark woods. It fed on fear, on the despair of those foolish enough to cross its path. And now, it had me. I noticed changes in myself, too. The isolation weighed heavily, my reflection sometimes flickering with shadowed eyes that weren't mine. I felt a hunger growing inside me, a dark urge to flee into the forest, to surrender to the shadows. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Friends and family who called to check on me heard only silence or frantic whispers. One evening, desperate and broken, I ventured outside into the cold Appalachian night. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Branches reached out like skeletal hands, and the fog clung thick and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, I heard that same scratching not at my window, but all around me. The shadow lurker was no longer just outside, was inside the woods, calling me home. I stumbled back to the house, but I knew this was only the beginning. The creature's hunger would never be satisfied. It was patient, eternal, and it would wait always just beyond the window pane, ready to slip inside when I finally let my guard down. I write this now as a warning. The woods hold things no one should disturb. If you hear scratching at your window in the dead of night, do not ignore it. Do not look. Because sometimes, the shadows waiting outside are not empty, and once they step inside, it may already be too late. Let's move to our fourth story. My name is Evelyn, and what I'm about to share is something I never thought I'd say out loud. It began with a simple antique purchase, an old music box I found at a dusty flea market deep in the Appalachian foothills. The box was beautiful, carved from dark wood with delicate inlays of mother of pearl, and when I wound it up, it played the sweetest, most haunting melody I'd ever heard. But that melody became a curse. The first night I brought the music box home, I heard faint music drifting through the house long after it had stopped playing. It was as if the melody lingered in the air, wrapping around every corner, soft but insistent. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. But over the next few days, things started to change. I began seeing shadows moving in the corners of my vision, ever fully there, just flickers and whispers. At first it was subtle, a sense of being watched, but soon the presence became more tangible. Doors I had closed would be open the next morning, objects misplaced, and I heard faint, almost inaudible humming late at night. The music box's melody became an obsession. I found myself winding it over and over, unable to resist the eerie beauty. But the more I listened, the more the shadows grew bolder. I started having vivid dreams of a woman dressed in old Appalachian garb, her face pale, and eyes hollow, singing the same haunting tune. She seemed trapped in some endless cycle. Reaching out for help I couldn't give. I researched the origins of the music box and discovered it once belonged to a woman named Maeve, a folk singer from a small mountain town, who vanished mysteriously. In the early 1900s, legend said Maeve's songs held powerful magic songs that could soothe the restless dead or summon darkness if sung with the wrong intent. One night, as the music box played itself, the humming turned into a mournful wail. The shadows converged, forming Maeve's ghostly figure, her eyes filled with sorrow and rage. She whispered in a voice like wind through dead leaves, warning me to stop playing the melody or be forever bound to her curse. But I couldn't stop. The music was part of me now, pulling me deeper into a nightmare where time blurred, and the line between the living and the dead faded. I became a prisoner of the melody, haunted by Maeve's song and the dark secrets it carried. If you ever come across an old music box with a haunting tune, beware. Some melodies are not meant to be heard, and some curses are tied not to places or objects, but to the very songs that echo through the Appalachian night. The days after I brought the music box home became a blur of fear and fascination. Each time the delicate melody played, I felt myself slipping further away from reality, drawn into a world that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. I tried to resist winding it up again, but my hands betrayed me, moving on their own as if controlled by some unseen force. The music was a siren's call I couldn't escape. I began noticing changes not only in my surroundings, but within myself. My reflection in the mirror sometimes looked different, paler, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare back at me. At night, the dreams became more vivid and terrifying. I saw Maeve's life unfold before me, a young woman caught between worlds, singing songs to comfort the dying, cursed by jealous townsfolk who feared her power. Her disappearance wasn't a mystery, it was a sacrifice, a binding ritual meant to contain the darkness she had awakened. The more I learned, the more I realized that the music box was a prison and a key all at once. The melody trapped Maeve's spirit and those she tried to save, their souls entwined in an eternal lament. Playing the tune was like unlocking a door that should never be opened, and every note echoed with the pain of the forgotten. One evening, I woke to the music box playing by itself, its eerie melody filling the dark room. The shadows gathered, twisting into Maeve's ghostly form. She reached out to me, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and warning. "Help me break the cycle," she whispered, "or be lost as I am." Terrified yet compelled, I searched through old town records, diaries, and whispered legends, desperate for a way to free her and the trapped souls. I found mention of a ritual, a final song meant to soothe the restless and close the door between worlds. But the ritual was dangerous, requiring a sacrifice of something precious. The night I decided to perform the ritual, the air grew cold and heavy. The music box played softly in the background, the melody winding around me like a serpent. Shadows flickered and danced, Maeve's spirit hovering nearby, watching, waiting as I sang the final verse of the ancient song. A wave of sorrow and rage swept through the room. The shadows writhed and screamed, then slowly began to fade. The music box's tune softened, then fell silent. For a moment, peace settled over the house. But I knew the cost. The melody had marked me forever, a guardian of the forgotten song, bound to the Appalachian night. If you ever hear a haunting tune carried on the wind, remember Maeve's warning. Some melodies carry more than music. They carry the weight of souls lost to time, waiting for release that may never come. The aftermath of that night lingered long after the shadows vanished and the music box fell silent. The oppressive weight that had settled over my home lifted, but a new awareness took its place, a sense that I was no longer alone, even in the daylight. Maeve's presence felt woven into the very fabric of my existence, a quiet companion watching, waiting. I noticed subtle changes in myself. Sometimes, when I spoke or sang, my voice carried an otherworldly resonance, as if Maeve's spirit sang through me. At times, fragments of old Appalachian songs I had never heard before echoed in my mind, haunting melodies filled with sorrow and longing. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Strangers in town began to look at me differently, their eyes flickering with recognition or fear. I heard whispers in the local diner, tales of the music box and the girl who disappeared. Stories I had thought were long forgotten. It seemed the curse wasn't just a thing of the past. It was alive, evolving, and now, somehow, part of me. I knew then that my life had changed irreversibly. The music box was more than an artifact. It was a living connection to a dark legacy. I became its keeper, burdened with protecting the secret melody from falling into the wrong hands, but also haunted by the fear that one day, the cycle might begin anew. On quiet nights, when the wind carries faint strains of that haunting tune through the trees, I feel Maeve's presence close by, a reminder of the price paid for beauty and the darkness that hides beneath Appalachian legends. The music plays on, eternal, unyielding, and waiting. If you ever find a music box playing a sorrowful melody in the dead of night, remember, some songs are bound by more than memory, and some curses are etched into the very notes that linger in the Appalachian air. Let's move to our fifth story. It started, innocently enough, a road trip through the winding mountain highways of the Appalachians with my two closest friends, Jake and Melissa. We were chasing fall colors, eager to escape the city's chaos, for a weekend of crisp air and endless forest. Little did we know that the serenity we sought would soon dissolve into a nightmare we could never forget. On our second day, we decided to explore a small, seemingly forgotten town we'd heard about from a gas station clerk. It was called Hollow Creek, and it didn't appear on many maps. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning travelers to keep their distance. But curiosity got the better of us. The town was eerie from the moment we arrived. Empty streets, dilapidated buildings with boarded-up windows, and an unsettling silence that pressed down like a thick fog. We parked near the old general store, a relic of peeling paint and rusted signs, and decided to look around. As we wandered, we found strange symbols etched into the wooden walls, carvings that looked ancient and ominous. Melissa was the first to notice the old well in the town square. It was covered with a rusted iron grate, but the air that seemed to seep from its depths was icy cold and carried a faint whispering sound. Jake joked about the town's ghost stories, but I could see the unease growing in his eyes. That night, we stayed in a rundown motel on the edge of town. The walls were thin, and every creak and groan of the old building seemed amplified. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange noises, footsteps in the hallway, distant whispers, and a low humming that seemed to come from the well itself. When morning came, Melissa was gone. We searched the motel, the town, and the surrounding woods, but she had vanished without a trace. All that remained was a faint trail leading toward the well, as if she had been drawn to it. Desperation took hold as Jake and I tried to uncover the town's secrets. We found a weathered journal in the motel's lobby, filled with warnings about a curse tied to the well and the town's founder, man obsessed with dark rituals and binding spirits to the earth. The journal spoke of sacrifices made to keep a malevolent entity imprisoned beneath the town, but it hinted that the barrier was weakening as night fell again. The town seemed to come alive with shadow shapes moving just beyond the edge of vision, whispering voices carried on the wind. Jake and I barricaded ourselves in our motel room, but the feeling of being watched was relentless. I remember hearing the well's whispers grow louder, a seductive call, promising safety if we only surrendered. The shadows pressed closer, and I knew the entity beneath was hungry, eager to reclaim what had been stolen. We never found Melissa. Some say Hollow Creek is swallowed by the mountains, hidden from the world until it chooses to reveal itself again. And those who venture too close risk becoming part of its dark legacy, trapped between worlds, lost to the whispers of the well. If you ever hear a faint humming carried on the Appalachian breeze, beware. It might be the well calling your name. The morning after Melissa disappeared, Jake and I were numb with disbelief. The sun had barely risen when I realized she was gone, her belongings untouched, no sign of struggle or explanation. Panic set in, but the town's eerie silence swallowed our cries for help. Hollow Creek felt like a tomb, an oubliette where time and hope decayed alongside the rotting wood and rusted iron. Determined to find answers, we scoured the motel and its surroundings, finding the weathered journal tucked beneath loose floorboards. The faded pages spoke of the town's dark history, how the founder, Elias Crow, was a man consumed by occult obsession. He believed the Appalachian Mountains were gateways to other realms, and through sacrifices and arcane rites, he bound a malevolent entity deep beneath the well to protect his town from outsiders. But the price was high: periodic offerings to keep the barrier strong, or the entity would rise again. As dusk settled, the temperature dropped sharply, and the air thickened with an unnatural stillness. Shadows lengthened, twisting into grotesque shapes that flickered at the edges of our vision. The well's whispers grew more distinct, curling through the streets like tendrils of smoke. Jake and I huddled in the motel room, our eyes wide and ears straining against the growing chorus of murmurs. Sleep was impossible. I swear I saw figures moving outside the window, silhouettes, too distorted to be human, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. The walls seemed to breathe, the old wooden boards creaking under unseen weight. Every sound was amplified: the drip of water from the faucet, the scraping of claws on the floor, distant laughter that wasn't human. At one point, the door rattled violently, and a voice whispered my name, coaxing me to open it. I didn't dare, clutching Jake's arm as the pounding intensified. The well's song, the humming, reached a fever pitch, and I felt it pulling at me, a dark current beneath my skin. The next morning, we found strange symbols etched into the motel walls in a black, tar-like substance. I couldn't tell if they had appeared overnight or if we'd been too terrified to notice. The journal mentioned similar marks, signs of the entity's influence seeping through cracks in the barrier. Desperation drove us to explore the well itself. The iron grate was cooler than ice, and when we peered down, a suffocating darkness stared back. From its depths came whispers promising release, power, and peace. The air felt thick with centuries of sorrow and rage. We knew we couldn't stay, but leaving was no simple matter. The roads twisted and turned, leading us in circles as if the town itself conspired to trap us. Each night the whispers grew louder, the shadows closer. Days later, A search party found Jake wandering near the edge of the forest, mumbling incoherently about voices and the well's song. He was never the same, eyes hollow, words fragmented. I remained, the last soul, tethered to Hollow Creek's curse. The well's humming now a constant companion in my mind. I write this as a warning. Hollow Creek is real. Hidden in the Appalachian folds, waiting. If the wind carries a faint humming, listen closely, maybe a call. And if you follow it, be prepared to lose yourself to the whispers of the well. Let's move to our sixth story. The rain had been falling for 3 straight days. A slow, relentless drizzle that soaked into the bones and turned the air into a heavy, metallic-tasting fog. For most people, in the mountain town of Briar Hollow, the weather was nothing unusual. It was spring after all, and the Appalachians seemed to thrive on dampness. But for Jordan Keller, a newcomer who'd moved into the outskirts of town only 3 months ago, the storm seemed to carry something else with it. Something that gnawed quietly at the edges of his nerves. Jordan had bought the property for almost nothing. A fact that seemed like a miracle when he'd first signed the papers. A 2-story farmhouse with faded white paint, a sagging barn, and a thick ring of forest surrounding the land like a living fence. The realtor had been brisk and polite, never meeting his eyes for too long. When he'd asked why the previous owners had left so suddenly, she'd shrugged and said only, "Some places aren't for everyone." He didn't press. The first month had been fine. Isolated, yes, but peaceful. He'd work on small repairs during the day and read at night while the wind rattled the old glass windows. It wasn't until the second month that the odd noises started. They weren't the usual creaks of an old house. No, these were sharper, more deliberate, like someone tapping on the walls from the inside. Sometimes it came from the barn, sometimes from under the floor. Once, it came from directly above his bed, in the attic space. By the time the rain began its 3-day siege, Jordan had convinced himself it was just the house settling, or animals making their way into the walls. But that first night of the storm, as he sat at the kitchen table, eating reheated stew, something happened that made him drop his spoon. The kitchen lights flickered, not the random, momentary flicker of bad wiring, but a rhythmic pulse. 1, 2, 3. Then off. The only sound in the sudden darkness was the rain and the faint scraping coming from the barn. It was faint at first, like nails dragging against wood, but it grew louder until it became a harsh, grating shriek. He grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding in his throat, and went to the back door. The beam of light barely cut through the thick fog, and the barn stood like a shadowed silhouette in the distance. As he stepped out into the rain, the sound stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Jordan pushed open the barn doors. Inside, the air was cold, far colder than the rainy night outside. His breath puffed out in the beam of his flashlight. The familiar smell of hay and dust was replaced by something else, something metallic and sour. The barn was empty, except for a single object that hadn't been there before, an old wooden rocking chair, its paint flaked away, sitting in the exact center of the dirt floor. It rocked, slowly back and forth. Jordan froze. The rain hammered the roof, but all he could hear was the faint creak of the chair. He backed out of the barn, shut the doors, and told himself he'd deal with it in the morning. But morning didn't come normally. The rain hadn't stopped. The fog was thicker than before, curling around the trees in dense, shifting coils. He noticed something strange when he walked to the edge of his property. The forest looked different. The familiar path that led into the woods was gone, replaced by unfamiliar thickets and leaning trees that seemed to bend toward him. That night, the rocking chair was gone from the barn. Instead, it was in his living room. Jordan didn't remember unlocking the barn, let alone carrying it in. He tried to convince himself it was exhaustion, maybe even sleepwalking. But when he went to touch the chair, the wood was wet train water dripping from its armrests. The tapping came again that night, only this time, it came from inside his bedroom. He lay frozen in bed, every muscle tense, listening to the deliberate pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap. He didn't move until the sun rose. Over the next few days, Jordan's reality seemed to unravel. He began hearing voices in the rain, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. Objects moved in the house when he left the room, always small at first. But eventually the rocking chair became the centerpiece of every space he entered, no matter where he tried to hide it. He started having dreams, vivid, suffocating dreams. Standing in the woods while the trees leaned in closer and closer, their bark splitting to reveal pale, human faces where knots should be. In the dreams, he could hear the rocking chair creaking somewhere behind him, even though he never turned. Around one night, desperate for sleep, he poured himself a heavy drink and sat at the kitchen table. The rain pounded the roof. The lights flickered. And then, without warning, the back door slammed open. There, framed in the doorway, stood a man, or what looked like one. He was tall, his limbs too long, his head slightly cocked, as though studying. Jordan, his clothes were soaked, hanging in tatters, and his skin was pale as moonlight. In one bony hand, he clutched the armrest of the rocking chair. "You've been sitting in my seat," the man said, his voice like wind dragging through. "Dead leaves." Jordan's mouth went dry. His body refused to move. The figure stepped inside, the smell of damp earth and rot filling the air. "It's time to give it back." And then, without even realizing he'd moved, Jordan found himself sitting in the chair. His body felt heavy, rooted. The man's hands pressed down on his shoulders, and the world began to fade, not into darkness, but into a cold, endless fog. When Jordan woke, it was morning. The rain had stopped. The house was silent. The chair was gone. But so were the doors. Every window now looked out into an endless, unbroken forest. No sky, no road, no town, just trees pressing against the glass, their bark twisting into familiar faces that smiled without joy. Somewhere far in the distance, the sound of a rocking chair creaked steadily, never stopping. And Jordan knew, with a hollow certainty, that he had taken someone's place in the storm. Let's move to our seventh story. The rain had been coming down for hours. The kind of steady, relentless downpour that turns backroads into rivers and makes the night feel like it has no end. Brian had been driving since sundown, his old sedan's wipers squealing as they struggled to clear the windshield. He wasn't planning to stop anywhere just a long overnight trip from one small town to another, but somewhere between the winding curves of the mountain highway and the weight of fatigue pressing on his eyelids, he realized he needed gas. The low fuel light blinked at him like a warning he could no longer ignore. The road ahead was pitch black, except for the faint shine of his headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. He hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. Then, through the sheets of rain, a pale green neon glow emerged in the distance. The letters spelled out Marrow Creek Gas, with the kind of peeling paint and rusty canopy that told him it had been there for decades. It was the only sign of life for miles. Brian pulled into the lot, his tires splashing through deep puddles. The gas station sat on the edge of a dense forest, its trees looming like tall, silent sentinels. The building was small, rectangular, and looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 70s. One of the fluorescent bulbs above the pumps was flickering violently, buzzing in a way that made his teeth itch. The place should have been closed. It was past 2 a.m. but the open sign in the window glowed a sickly red dot inside. The store was quiet, save for the hum of a refrigerator in the back. The smell hit him immediately. A mix of damp wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. Behind the counter sat a man who looked like he belonged to another era, entirely gray hair combed back neatly, skin pale and paper-thin, wearing a collared shirt that might have been white once, but had long since yellowed. He didn't look up when Brian entered. Instead, his watery blue eyes stayed fixed on the counter in front of him, where he seemed to be absently tapping a long, thin finger. "Need some gas," Brian said, his voice sounding too loud in the still air. The man's eyes slowly rose to meet his. There was something unsettling in the way he stared, like he was studying Brian, memorizing every detail of his face. Without a word, he reached under the counter, pulled out an old-fashioned key with a heavy brass tag, and slid it toward him. "Pump 3, the man said, his voice dry and brittle. As if unused for years, Brian took the key, unnerved but too tired to dwell on it. He stepped back outside, the rain immediately soaking through his jacket. Pump 3 was the farthest from the building, half hidden in the shadows where the canopy's light didn't quite reach. As he began fueling up, he noticed something strange. The numbers on the pump didn't click over smoothly. Instead, they stuttered, almost like the mechanism inside was grinding against something. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the tree line. A shape tall, thin, and entirely still stood between the dripping pines. He blinked, and it was gone, replaced by only the dark weave of branches. When the tank was full, Brian returned the nozzle and headed inside to pay. The clerk hadn't moved. He sat exactly as before, hands resting on the counter, eyes locked on Brian as soon as he entered. "That'll be 32. The man said. Brian handed him the cash, and for a moment, their fingers touched. The skin was ice cold. The man's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and Brian felt a deep, instinctive urge to leave as quickly as possible. But before he could turn toward the door, the man spoke again. "Best not take the highway past Hollow Bend tonight." Brian paused. "Why?" The man's lips twitched, half a smile, half a grimace. "Road's been wrong. Folks don't come back from there sometimes." The words lingered in the air like the scent of smoke, and Brian left without asking more. He got back in his car, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot. The rain hadn't let up, and his wipers squeaked across the glass in their rhythmic, desperate motion. His GPS told him Hollow Bend was the fastest route, but the clerk's words sat heavy in his mind. Still, he was exhausted and wanted to get home. The turnoff came sooner than expected. Narrow road swallowed by the dark. Against his better judgment, he took it. At first it was just a normal country road, lined with trees and occasional bursts of overgrown grass. Then, gradually, the asphalt began to look wrong. Cracks spiderwebbed across it in unnatural patterns. And deep puddles reflected nothing, not the headlights, not the trees above. The rain seemed quieter here, muffled somehow, and the forest on either side pressed in like a closing jaw, a mile in. His headlights caught something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was tall, impossibly thin, and faced away from him. Its head twitched slightly, like it was listening. Brian slowed to a crawl. "Hey," he called through the open window. No answer. Then, in a movement too fast to follow, the figure snapped. Its head backward, not turning its body, just its head revealing a pale, featureless face. Brian slammed the accelerator, swerving around it, heart hammering in his chest. In his rearview mirror, the figure was still standing there, head tilted unnaturally far, watching him as he sped away. But the road didn't end. He drove 4 miles, yet every bend, every curve, looked the same: dark trees, cracked pavement, endless rain. The fuel gauge began to drop again, impossibly fast. His hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. When he finally saw light ahead, it felt like salvation until he recognized the pale green neon glow. Marrow Creek Gas, the exact same station he had left an hour ago. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes the night Danny Baker took the back road home from work. He was used to the drive, 12 winding miles of narrow forest lanes, no streetlights, and no cell service. His wife always told him to take the highway, but Danny preferred the quiet isolation of the shortcut. He'd been driving it for years, and nothing bad had ever happened. But that night, something was different. The trees seemed to lean closer to the road, their skeletal branches scraping at the sides of his truck as he passed. The headlights illuminated a swirling wall of snow. But beyond that was nothing, just the endless dark of the woods. Halfway through his drive, Danny saw something ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was wearing a long coat, black and tattered, with the hood pulled low. Thinking someone's car had broken down, Danny slowed and rolled down his window to ask if they needed help. But when the figure turned toward him, Danny's breath caught in his throat. There was no face, just a smooth, pale surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Before he could react, the faceless thing tilted its head in an unnatural, jerky movement, then vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, swallowed by the snow. Danny sat frozen for a moment, his heart pounding, before flooring the gas and speeding away. But the further he drove, the more he realized he was lost. The road twisted in ways it never had before. Familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by strange, crooked trees he'd never seen. The snow was coming down harder now, and his wipers barely kept up. Then, in the blizzard's haze, Danny saw it again, the faceless figure, standing by the roadside this time, watching him. Or at least, he thought it was watching. It was impossible to tell without eyes. He passed it quickly, but a mile later, there it was again, and again. Each time he saw it, it was closer to his truck. Panic set in. Danny gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck fishtailing on the icy road. The GPS was useless, the signal long gone. Then, up ahead, he saw a light swarm, golden lights spilling from the windows of a small cabin. Without thinking, he pulled over, jumped out, and ran to the door. His boots crunched in the snow, and the cold air burned his lungs. He pounded on the door until an elderly woman opened it. She didn't look surprised to see him. In fact, she looked almost sad. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "It's already chosen you," Danny stammered, asking what she meant. But before she could answer, the lights in the cabin flickered. The woman's eyes widened, and she slammed the door in his face. Behind him, in the darkness of the storm, he heard its soft footsteps crunching in the snow. He turned, and there it was, standing no more than 20 feet away. This time, it didn't vanish. It began to move, toward him, each step deliberate and slow. Danny bolted back to his truck, nearly slipping on the ice. He yanked the door open, jumped inside, and sped off, the wheels spinning wildly. He didn't care where he ended up, he just needed to get away. But no matter how far he drove, the figure was always there, standing at the roadside. Just ahead, by the time the storm cleared, Danny's truck was found abandoned in a ditch, the driver's door hanging open. His footprints led a short distance into the woods, then stopped completely, as if he'd vanished into thin air. The only other tracks in the snow were long, narrow impressions shaped like bare human feet. Some locals say the thing that took him is older than the forest itself. Others claim it only appears to travelers lost in the snow, drawn to them by the sound of their heartbeat. Whatever it is, they say it wears the last face it stole. And if you see it on a winter night, you won't be driving home alone. Let's move to our 8th story. It was a Tuesday night in late October when Jared found himself behind the wheel of his dented blue pickup, coasting along the near-empty stretch of Highway 47. The road was the kind that didn't get much love from the county-faded lane markings, crumbling shoulders, and potholes filled with muddy rainwater. It ran parallel to the railroad tracks for most of its length, weaving through old farmland and patches of woodland that seemed to grow darker the deeper you drove. Jared had driven this route plenty of times before, but that night, something about it felt wrong. The air seemed thicker somehow, as if he was pushing the truck through invisible syrup. He glanced at the dashboard. Clock, 11:46 p.m. The only light came from his dim headlights and the occasional reflection of the rails beside him. The radio had given up to static an hour earlier, leaving the cab in heavy silence. He was delivering a few crates of produce from the farm where he worked to a small 24-hour grocery store 2 towns over. Normally, it was an uneventful job, just a straight shot, a drop-off, and then home. But that night, the stretch of road ahead seemed to stretch longer than usual, and Jared couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. It started as a flicker in his side mirror, something darting between the trees. At first he told himself it was just his imagination, or maybe a deer moving along the roadside. But after a few minutes, it happened again. A shadow, quick and low, slipping in and out of view. The more he tried to focus on it, the harder it became to see clearly. Like the darkness itself was hiding whatever was there. The air inside the truck grew colder, making Jared reach for the heater knob. That's when he noticed something strange. The frost on the inside of the windshield. It hadn't been there a moment ago, and the night wasn't that cold. He leaned forward, wiping it with his sleeve, but by the time his eyes cleared a spot, something had appeared in the road ahead. It was a figure tall, thin, motionless, standing dead center in his lane. Jared's heart slammed in his chest. He swerved hard to the right, the truck tires biting into gravel, and for a split second, he thought he saw the figure turn its head toward him, pale face, hollow eyes. mouth hanging open as if screaming, though no sound reached him. Then the figure vanished, replaced by empty road and the bouncing glare of his headlights against the trees. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a scarecrow blown onto the road by the wind. He told himself anything that sounded halfway reasonable, but his body wasn't buying it. His hands were shaking, and his gut told him to get this delivery over with as quickly as possible. The truck rattled along for another mile before the smell hit him. It was sharp, metallic blood, the kind of smell you never forget if you've been around it long enough. His father had been a hunter, and Jared had grown up helping clean deer in the garage. This was the same smell, but stronger, heavier, as if the air itself had been saturated with it. He rolled down the window to escape it, but the cold night air carried the stench in waves. Something moved again in the trees to his left. This time, Jared slowed the truck, leaning forward to get a better look. His headlights washed over the edge of the forest, catching glimpses of something pale weaving between the trunks. And then it stepped out. It wasn't human, not really. It had the vague outline of a person, head, arms, legs, but the proportions were wrong, too tall, too thin. The arms hung almost to its knees, and its skin looked as if it had been stretched too tight over its bones. Its face was featureless, except for two deep black pits, where the eyes should be. It took one step toward the truck. Jared slammed his foot on the gas. The tires spun in the loose gravel before gripping, and the truck roared forward. He didn't look back, didn't want to, but in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw the thing lurch forward faster than anything that size should move. The road curved, and the trees swallowed the view behind him. His breathing was ragged now, and every instinct screamed at him to turn around, find another route. But Highway 47 had no alternate roads for miles. Once you were on it, you were committed until the next junction. And in that moment, Jared realized he didn't remember ever seeing another car that night. It was just him. And minutes passed. Intense silence, broken only by the hum of the tires. He kept his eyes locked on the road, refusing to check the mirrors again. Then bang, something slammed into the side of the truck, hard. The steering wheel jerked in his hands, and the vehicle swayed dangerously toward the ditch. Jared fought it back onto the road, his heart pounding in his ears. Another bang, this time from the passenger side. He risked a glance and saw a pale hand gripping the frame of the truck door, long fingers curling over the edge. Jared swerved violently, scraping along the guardrail. The hand vanished. The smell of blood was choking now. He gagged, eyes watering, but he didn't dare slow down. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator until the speedometer needle trembled at the high end. Finally, lights ahead, relief, surged through him as he recognized the faint glow of the gas station where he usually stopped for coffee before the grocery drop-off. The sign buzzed weakly, a flickering open hanging in the window. He pulled in hard, tires squealing, and threw the truck into park, but the relief didn't last. The gas station was empty, not just empty, wrong. The lights inside hummed too loudly, and the air felt unnaturally still. The shelves were fully stocked, yet everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. A single fly buzzed lazily near the counter, and the coffee pot sat half full, the surface scummed over. "Hello," Jared called out, stepping inside. No answer. He moved down the first aisle, his boots crunching faintly on the dust-covered tile. Every instinct told him to grab something hot, maybe lock the door, and wait until sunrise. But as he passed the refrigerated section, he froze. Every carton of milk, every bottle of juice, all of them were filled with something red. Thick, dark red. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. His eyes darted to the security mirror in the corner of the store. The reflection showed the aisles behind him, empty dot, and then, for a moment, it WASN. Single quotes did the reflection, just behind him. Its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Jared spun, but the aisle was empty. His pulse hammered. In his throat, he backed toward the counter, fumbling for his phone. No signal. He reached for the landline on the counter. Dead. The door slammed shut behind him. Let's move to our 9SC story. It was a little after 3:15. In the morning when Kyle Parker heard the first tap on the glass. At first, He thought it was just a moth, or maybe a piece of loose gravel flung from the nearby road. He was alone behind the counter of a rural gas station just off Highway 19. The kind of place where business trickled down to nothing after midnight. The air was still, the parking lot empty, and the night had that heavy pressing quiet that seemed to make every noise louder than it should be. The tapping came again, 3 sharp raps in quick succession. Kyle glanced toward the front door, expecting to see some late-night traveler fumbling with their wallet, or maybe a drunk college kid heading home from a party. But there was no one there. Just the warped reflection of the station's neon sign in the glass, and the pale silver light of the moon spilling over the cracked asphalt. He shook it off, went back to organizing cigarette cartons, and told himself not to get spooked. Nights like these, your brain could make monsters out of shadows. But a few minutes later, the sound returned. This time louder, more deliberate. Kyle stepped out from behind the counter, feeling a strange tension in the air. When he reached the door, he peered outside. The lot was still empty. No cars, no movement. But then, in the far corner of the lot, just beyond the reach of the flickering light, he thought he saw something. A figure it wasn't, standing still like a person would. It seemed to sway, almost as if it were caught in a breeze, except the air was dead still. Kyle squinted, trying to make sense of it. The outline was wrong, too thin in some places, and too long in others. Like someone stretched out of proportion. He backed away from the glass, heart ticking faster. Small-town kids loved to play pranks on the night clerks. Maybe it was just that. But deep down, Kyle felt something colder, something that didn't fit the harmless prank theory. He locked the front door. About 15 minutes passed before the sound came again. Not a tap this time, but a slow, dragging scrape, like fingernails or metal, dragging along the glass. Kyle's stomach turned. The noise crept from the side window near the ice machine, then across to the door. He forced himself to look, expecting that figure again. But now there was nothing. That was when the station's overhead lights blinked, just for a second. Enough to cast the lot into complete darkness before they flickered back on. In that second of blackness, Kyle swore he heard breathing. Not his own, heavier, slower. Right on the other side of the glass. He tried to shake it off, tried to focus on restocking, but every creak of the old building made him jump. Then the phone behind the counter rang. He nearly dropped the box in his hands. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." Kyle hesitated, but picked it up. A whisper crackled through the line. "You shouldn't have locked the door." The line went dead. His hand shook as he set the phone down. This had to be some kind of elaborate joke. Maybe a friend trying to scare him. But no one knew he was working the overnight shift tonight. Not even his closest friends. He'd picked it up last minute, when another clerk called in sick. That thought brought a sinking realization. Whoever was outside knew he was here. Kyle grabbed the old baseball bat kept under the counter and stepped back to the office area. There was a small security monitor in there that cycled through the 4 exterior cameras. The grainy black and white images clicked through one after another. Empty lot. Back door. Dumpster area. On the 4th feed, he froze. The figure was standing just at the edge of the lot, facing directly toward the camera. It wasn't swaying now. It was perfectly still. Its head, if that's what it was, tilted slightly, as though it were watching him through the lens. Kyle's skin crawled. The camera switched feeds again, breaking the connection. When it cycled back, the figure was gone. The rest of the shift became a blur of half-heard noises and the feeling of being watched. Kyle tried to focus on the clock, willing the hours to pass. But time seemed to move slower the more he thought about leaving. Around 5:45 a.m., just as the first pale light of dawn crept into the sky, he began to feel almost relieved. The morning clerk, Tina, would be arriving soon. He decided to wait for her in the locked office. That's when he heard the faintest knock. It came from inside the building. Kyle gripped the bat tighter and scanned the office. There was a storage closet in the corner, the door slightly ajar. His breath caught in his throat. He'd been in this room all night. That door had been closed. The knock came again, 3 slow, deliberate raps. Kyle's mind screamed at him to run, but his body wouldn't move. The silence that followed seemed endless, pressing in from all sides. Finally, gathering every shred of courage he had, he stepped toward the closet and swung the door open. It was empty, but on the inside of the door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Let me in." The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon when Tina arrived. She found the station's front door still locked, the lights still on, and the register untouched. But Kyle Parker was nowhere to be found. The only sign of him was the bat, lying in the middle of the office floor, and on the security monitor. The last image the cameras had captured, a tall, distorted figure, standing inside the store, just behind the counter. The security monitor flickered again, the grainy black and white images cycling through the 4 exterior cameras. Kyle's eyes stayed glued to the screen, searching for any sign of movement, anything that would explain the scratches and the chilling message. The cold dread in his chest tightened as the feeds switched rapidly, almost like a malfunction, before settling on the back lot there. Bathed in the weak glow of the station's exterior floodlight, stood the figure again. Its form seemed clearer. This time, elongated limbs that bent in unnatural ways. A gaunt silhouette that didn't quite fit the shape of a human. Its head was tilted, the same eerie gesture from before. But now Kyle could swear it was staring directly into the camera lens. The figure raised a hand slowly, fingers curling into a claw-like shape, and then the feed went black. Kyle yelped and slammed his fist on the desk. The monitor buzzed back to life, but the figure was gone. The room felt suddenly colder, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in seconds. His breath fogged in the stale air of the office. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the silence, the slow creak of the office door. Kyle spun around, bat raised, but the doorway was empty. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to take steady breaths, listening. Then, the scratching began again, slow and deliberate, but this time coming from inside the ventilation grate near the ceiling. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. The scratching grew louder, scraping against metal. It was almost rhythmic, like a twisted lullaby. Then, a faint whispering rose up, unintelligible at first, but gradually forming words. "Let me in, let me in." Kyle's skin crawled. He banged on the wall beside the vent with the bat. The noise stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the overhead lights flickered violently and went out. The office was plunged into darkness. His phone was dead. The emergency flashlight was nowhere to be found. He was alone, trapped in an old gas station office with a presence that wanted inside. Suddenly, icy fingers seemed to grasp his ankles. He dropped the bat and screamed, stumbling back against the wall. His legs burned where the cold gripped. The whispering rose to a terrible crescendo, voices overlapping, chanting the same haunting plea. Kyle lunged for the door handle, yanking it open and sprinting into the main store. The lights flashed on, briefly revealing empty aisles and scattered merchandise, then cut out again, leaving him in darkness. He fumbled for the door, leading outside, heart racing. As he touched the handle, he felt a cold breath brush his neck, a whisper so close he could hear the wet rasp of it. "Let me in." He twisted the doorknob and burst outside into the stormy night. The rain was cold and blinding, thunder rolling in the distance. He ran toward his car, the headlights cutting through the sheets of water. Suddenly, the tall figure emerged from the shadows, blocking his path. The ground beneath it was saturated with blood, dark and sticky. Its face was a blank mask, smooth and featureless, except for the endless black pits where its eyes should be. Kyle froze, panic rooting him to the spot. The thing's long fingers reached out, dripping with crimson, curling toward him. He closed his eyes, ready to scream, and then a voice shattered the night. "Kyle." The figure recoiled, its form wavering like smoke. A second figure appeared, a woman soaked and breathless, holding a flashlight. It was Tina, the morning clerk. "Kyle, get in the car," she yelled, pulling him along. They jumped into the truck, the engine roaring to life. As they sped away, Kyle glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure stood at the gas station entrance, watching, waiting. But it didn't follow. Later, Tina told him the story she'd heard from locals, about a spirit trapped in the station, a soul lost to a violent death years before, forever seeking entry to the living world. She said it fed on fear, growing stronger with every soul it claimed. Kyle never returned to that gas station overnight. But sometimes, when he drives past on quiet nights, he swears he sees a shadow in the window. A pale face watching, waiting for someone else to let it in. ChatGPT said, "Let's move to our 10-saint story." For years, the tiny town of Millbrook sat quietly nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, untouched by the rush of modern life. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets rarely stayed buried. But that changed the night Laura Jenkins disappeared. Laura was a local schoolteacher, well-liked and known for her kindness. One chilly November evening, she left the town library late, the streetlights flickering above her as she walked toward her car parked at the far edge of the lot. No one saw her leave, and by morning, she was gone. At first, the town whispered about a runaway, maybe a tragic accident. But as days passed, strange occurrences began. People reported seeing a woman matching Laura's description wandering the outskirts of the forest, her silhouette visible through the mist, always just out of reach. Some swore they heard her voice carried on the wind, soft and pleading, while others felt icy fingers brush their skin even on the warmest days. Jake Miller, a local journalist with a penchant for the unexplained, decided to investigate. He interviewed townsfolk, explored the woods, and uncovered an old legend about the Whispering Woman, a spirit trapped between worlds, searching for a way home. The legend said that anyone who followed her into the forest never returned. One night, determined to find answers, Jake ventured into the fog-laden woods. As he walked deeper, the trees seemed to close around him, shadows stretching and twisting unnaturally. He heard faint whispers that grew louder, turning into desperate cries. His flashlight flickered, and through the haze, he saw a figure, a pale woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and dark. She reached out, beckoning him closer. Jake's heart pounded as he stepped forward, but a cold gust slammed into him, pushing him back. The whispers turned into a scream that echoed through the trees. He stumbled, tripping over roots, and when he looked up, the woman was gone. Shaken, Jake fled the forest, but the encounter left him forever changed. He felt her presence in every shadow, heard her voice in the wind, and knew the town of Millbrook would never be the same. The mystery of Laura Jenkins and the Whispering Woman remained unsolved, a chilling reminder that some secrets are better left undisturbed. Jake's escape from the forest wasn't just physical, it was psychological. That night, as he drove back into town, the oppressive weight of the woods seemed to cling to him. The fog rolled in thick on the roadside, muffling the sound of his tires, and he swore he could hear a soft voice whispering from the trees, just beyond the reach of his headlights. Back at his apartment, Jake tried to shake the feeling. He sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of old newspaper clippings and notes from his interviews. The townspeople's stories about the Whispering Woman were haunting in their similarity, a pale figure, caught between life and death, forever trapped in the forest's shadow. Some claimed she was Laura herself, doomed by some ancient curse. Others believed she was a spirit older than the town itself, feeding off the grief of those left behind. Jake knew that chasing ghosts could be dangerous both figuratively and literally, but the questions gnawed at him. What had happened to Laura? Could the stories be true? And if so, was the Whispering Woman real, or just a manifestation of the town's collective fear? Days blurred as Jake dove deeper into his research. He visited the town's oldest residents, who spoke in hushed tones about disappearances dating back decades. Young women and men vanishing without a trace after wandering too close to the forest's edge. One elderly woman handed him a faded journal, its pages brittle and stained. It belonged to a man named Thomas Granger, a settler who had chronicled his encounters with a mysterious entity in the woods. The journal spoke of a woman with eyes like empty wells and a voice that could lull a person to sleep forever. It told of strange symbols carved into trees, rituals performed to keep her at bay, and the terrible price of failure. Reading the words, Jake felt the cold fingers of fear wrap tighter around his chest. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house seemed amplified. Every gust of wind, a whispered warning. Shadows moved just beyond the edges of his vision. and the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Unable to resist, Jake returned to the forest once more, armed. With the knowledge from the journal and a determination to confront the darkness, he followed the winding paths deeper than before, guided by the faint glow of his flashlight and the distant cries that seemed both real and unreal. Hours passed. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, their bark marked with the strange symbols from the journal. The air was thick with moisture and something else, decay, sorrow, and a faint metallic temps. Suddenly the whispering began again, soft and enticing. Drawing him forward, he rounded a bend and saw her standing at the center of a small clearing bathed in pale moonlight. The whispering woman was more terrifying in person than in the stories. Her skin was ghostly white, her hair tangled and dark, and her eyes deep voids that seemed to pull at his soul. She lifted a hand, beckoning him closer, her voice like a lullaby. "Come to me," she whispered. "Stay with me." Jake's feet felt rooted, unable to move. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows stretching toward him like grasping hands. Panic surged through him, breaking the trance, and he stumbled backward, breaking free of her spell. As he ran, the cries turned into furious screams, echoing through the trees. Branches clawed at his clothes and face. The ground seemed alive with unseen hands trying to pull him under. He burst from the forest's edge, just as dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Breathless and shaking, Jake looked back. Once more, the whispering woman stood at the tree line, watching silently as if mourning. From that day forward, Jake's life changed irrevocably. The presence followed him, haunting his dreams and waking moments alike. No matter where he went, he felt those hollow eyes watching, waiting. The town of Millbrook, too, remained trapped in the shadow of the whispering woman, its residents wary of the forest's edge and the dark secrets it held. Jake knew one thing. With certainty, some doors once opened can never be closed, and some spirits, no matter how lost, refuse to rest. In the days that followed his escape from the forest, Jake found himself isolated and restless. His once orderly routine shattered, replaced by sleepless nights and wandering thoughts. He spent hours poring over the journal of Thomas Granger, seeking answers in the faded ink and cryptic entries. One passage caught his eye. "The whispering woman is bound by the sorrow she carries, a spirit caught between the world of the living and the dead. To set her free, one must unravel the truth buried beneath the ancient oaks and confront the darkness that lies within the heart of the forest." Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was a call to action, a challenge to uncover the roots of the curse, to bring peace, not just to the restless spirit, but to himself and the town. With a heavy resolve, he reached out to Sarah Bennett, a local historian known for her knowledge of Millbrook's folklore. Sarah was hesitant at first, but after hearing Jake's story, she agreed to help. Together, they explored old maps, church records, and diaries. Piecing together a history of the town and the forest that surrounded it, they discovered that centuries ago, Millbrook had been the site of a tragic event. A young woman accused of witchcraft had been condemned and left to die in the woods. Legend held that her spirit returned to haunt the land, seeking justice and vengeance. The whispering woman was believed to be that same restless soul. Bound by pain and betrayal, Sarah revealed a forgotten ritual, an offering of light and remembrance, performed at the heart of the forest during the full moon. It was said to soothe the spirit, releasing her from her torment. The next full moon was only days away. Jake and Sarah prepared cautiously, gathering candles, herbs, and relics described in the ancient texts. When night fell, they ventured into the forest, the air thick with anticipation and fear. The trees seemed to close around them as they followed the path to the clearing where Jake had first encountered the spirit. There, under the silver light, they set the candles in a circle and began the ritual, speaking words that felt both foreign and familiar. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying their voices deeper into the darkness. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The whispering woman appeared, her form flickering like a flame. Her hollow eyes met Jake's, filled with centuries of sorrow. For a moment, the forest was silent. Then, she slowly knelt, and a single tear traced down her pale cheek. A gentle warmth spread through the clearing, the shadows retreating. The woman's form shimmered, growing lighter until she dissolved into a cascade of glowing motes, drifting skyward. Jake felt the weight lift from his chest, the oppressive darkness replaced by a fragile peace. But as they turned to leave, a faint whisper echoed, a warning, or perhaps a farewell carried on the breeze. "Remember me." Back in Millbrook, the forest seemed quieter. The air felt lighter, the fog less dense, and though the town was scarred by its history, it finally had a chance to heal. Jake returned to his work, forever changed by the encounter, knowing some stories don't end in darkness, but in the fragile light of hope. Let's move to our 11 Saints story. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled deep within the dense forests, lies a forgotten logging town called Hollow Creek. Once bustling with life, the town now stands deserted, its wooden buildings weathered and decaying, swallowed by creeping vines and relentless moss. The only signs of life are the whispers of wind through the skeletal trees and the legends passed down by those who once dared to visit. Ethan Carter, a young urban explorer and paranormal investigator, had heard about Hollow Creek from an old journal he stumbled upon in a used bookstore. The journal belonged to a man named Harold Green, a logger who documented strange events and eerie sightings during the town's final days. Intrigued by the mystery, Ethan decided to visit, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural and unravel the town's secrets. Upon arriving, Ethan was immediately struck by the oppressive silence that seemed to smother the area. The thick canopy overhead blocked much of the daylight, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. As he wandered the main street, his footsteps echoed eerily against the crumbling facades. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay, a reminder of the town's slow surrender to nature. Ethan set up his equipment in what used to be the town's general store abroad, dusty space littered with shattered glass and rotting shelves. He began reviewing the journal, reading passages about unexplained noises, vanishing workers, and a malevolent presence haunting the forests surrounding Hollow Creek. According to Harold, the source of the terror was a dark entity known as the Hollow Man, a shadowy figure said to consume the souls of those who ventured too far into the woods. That first night, Ethan recorded hours of ambient sound, capturing faint whispers and unsettling groans carried on the wind. Around midnight, a sudden coldness enveloped the store, and the temperature dropped sharply. His breath became visible in the stale air, and an overwhelming feeling of dread settled over him. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, pulsing as if alive. Suddenly, his voice recorder picked up a low growl, a sound that didn't belong to any known animal. It was guttural, primal, echoing with a malice that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. He quickly turned on his flashlight and scanned the room, but found nothing, only the decay and silence. Determined to confront whatever haunted Hollow Creek, Ethan ventured into the forest the next day. The journal warned of the forest's unnatural grasp, how it shifted paths and led travelers astray. As he pushed deeper among the towering trees, the light dimmed and the shadows lengthened. Strange symbols carved into bark marked the path, their meaning lost to time but radiating a sinister energy. Hours into his exploration, Ethan felt the oppressive presence grow stronger. The sounds of snapping branches and rustling leaves echoed, unnervingly close, though he saw no source. His heart pounded as an unnatural chill crept through the air. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared between the trees, a figure, tall and thin, faceless, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. The Hollow Man. Ethan froze, unable to look away, as the entity glided closer, its form flickering like a flame, and the wind, he could feel its cold breath, smell the decay that surrounded it. Panicked, Ethan scrambled backward, breaking into a run through the tangled underbrush. Branches clawed at him, and the forest seemed to twist and close in, disorienting him. He burst from the trees just as darkness fell, his lungs burning and clothes torn. Back in the store, Ethan reviewed his recordings and photos there. Caught in a blurry image was the unmistakable shape of the Hollow Man lurking just beyond his flashlight's reach. The next morning, Ethan found the town's old cemetery, a neglected graveyard swallowed by weeds and time. Among the weathered headstones, he discovered the grave of Harold Green, marked only by a broken wooden cross. Near the grave lay a tattered journal, left as a warning. The hollow man feeds on fear. To face him is to risk losing your soul. As night fell over Hollow Creek once more, Ethan prepared for a final confrontation. With only his camera and voice recorder, he stepped into the darkness, ready to challenge the ancient evil that had claimed so many lives. The forest was alive with whispers and shadows, and the hollow man waited. The forest around Hollow Creek seemed to breathe as Ethan stepped cautiously along the narrow, winding path. The weight of countless eyes, whether real or imagined, down on him from the darkness. His flashlight cut a thin beam through the thick blackness, illuminating only gnarled roots and twisted branches that seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. Every crackle of twigs beneath his boots sent a jolt through his body, and the eerie silence was punctuated only by the faint whisper of wind weaving through the dense canopy above. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, the cold air biting into his lungs as he clutched his camera tightly, ready to capture whatever came next. The journal's words echoed in his mind. The hollow man feeds on fear. He tried to steady his nerves, telling himself that this was just a story folklore spun by frightened loggers. But deep down, he knew he was face to face with something ancient, something hungry. A sudden rustling off to his left made him whip around, heart pounding wildly. Nothing but the shadows. Then, from deeper in the forest, a low guttural growl vibrated through the air, as if the darkness itself had found a voice. Ethan raised his camera and began filming, fingers trembling. Through the viewfinder, he saw a dark shape materialize between the trees, tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs bending at grotesque angles. The hollow man's face was a blank void, blacker than the night, absorbing the light. Its presence sucked the warmth from the air, leaving a chill that seeped into Ethan's bones. Ethan swallowed his fear and whispered, "I'm not afraid." But the creature moved closer, its limbs elongating and twisting, limbs scraping against tree bark in a harsh, discordant rhythm. The growl morphed into a whisper, an unintelligible chant that seemed to echo from the earth itself. Panicking, Ethan turned and ran, branches clawing at his jacket, roots threatening to trip him. The forest shifted unnervingly, the path twisting and looping, as if the trees themselves were rearranging to trap him. Every step was agony, breath ragged, muscles burning with exhaustion. Suddenly, he stumbled into a clearing, a circle of ancient stones covered in moss. In the center, a small, weathered altar bore a single, flickering candle. Ethan's eyes darted around. The hollow man stood just beyond the edge, a sinister silhouette against the dark trees. Gathering all his courage, Ethan stepped into the circle. The moment he crossed the threshold, the forest's oppressive silence was pierced by a cacophony of voices, screams, laughter, cries, merging into a deafening roar. The hollow man lunged forward, but an invisible force slammed against it, pushing it back. Ethan grasped the altar and whispered an incantation he'd found in Harold Green's journal, a plea for release, a call for peace. The candle's flame flared bright, casting golden light across the clearing. The hollow man shrieked, its form unraveling into shadowy tendrils that dissipated into the night as dawn broke. The forest felt lighter, the suffocating darkness lifted. Ethan collapsed beside the altar, exhausted but alive. He had faced the ancient evil of Hollow Creek and lived to tell the tale. The town remained quiet, its secrets buried but no longer deadly. Ethan knew the hollow man's hunger was sated, for now, but the woods still whispered, and some shadows never fully fade. Let's move to our 12-saint story. The Appalachian Trail stretches over 2,000 miles of rugged wilderness, winding through dense forests, steep ridges, and isolated hollows. For most, it's a challenge, a test of endurance and spirit. But for some, it's something darker, a place where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural blur, where the echoes of old tragedies still haunt the misty woods. Evan Mitchell was an experienced hiker, drawn to the trail by a desire to escape the noise of the world and find solitude among the ancient trees. He was used to roughing it, navigating wild terrain, and facing unpredictable weather, but nothing had prepared him for what he would encounter on a lonely stretch of the trail near Roan Mountain. On the third day of his trek, Evan camped near a narrow ridge overlooking a valley swallowed by fog. As night fell, the forest grew unnaturally silent. No crickets chirped, no owls called, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. Evan felt a chill crawl over his skin despite the warm summer air. That's when he heard it. Faint footsteps crunching on dry leaves, moving around the perimeter of his campsite. He called out, but there was no response. Only the sound stopped, leaving a pressing, eerie quiet. Evan told himself it was probably a deer or some other animal, but unease settled deep in his gut. The next morning he found strange markings carved into the bark of several nearby trees, symbols he didn't recognize, sharp and precise, as if made by a blade rather than claws. Curiosity pushed him to follow the path marked by the carvings, leading him away from the main trail and into a dense thicket. As he ventured deeper, the air grew colder and the light dimmer, filtered through thick canopies. Then, Evan glimpsed a figure, tall, with an impossibly thin frame and glowing amber eyes that seemed to pierce the gloom. The figure vanished instantly when Evan blinked, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Shaken, he hurried back to his campsite, only to find it disturbed his gear scattered and a small pile of fresh earth nearby. It was as if something had been digging beneath his tent. That night, Evan struggled to sleep. The footsteps returned, accompanied by whispers, soft, unintelligible voices carried on the wind. He clutched his flashlight tightly, shining it into the darkness whenever the sounds grew louder. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the night. Evan bolted upright, heart racing. The scream faded into a long, low wail that seemed to echo endlessly across the mountains. Over the next days, Evan noticed more oddities. His compass spun wildly, electronics malfunctioned, and shadows darted at the edge of his vision. The forest felt alive, watching him, testing him. Determined to escape, he tried to retrace his steps, but the trail had changed. Paths he'd memorized twisted into unfamiliar directions. The forest was a labyrinth, designed to trap and confuse. The fourth night, Evan stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with old hunting gear and faded photographs of missing hikers. On the wall was a map, marked with red X's and cryptic notes about disappearances over decades. As Evan studied the map, the cabin seemed to close in around him. The air grew heavy, and the glowing eyes from the woods appeared in the window, staring with hungry intensity. Desperate, Evan fled into the night, running blind through the maze of trees. The whispers grew louder, turning into voices chanting in an ancient tongue. Exhausted and terrified, Evan finally collapsed at the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley. Below, the fog swirled thick, an impenetrable dot, in the last moments before. Unconsciousness, he heard the voice clearly, speaking his name and promising eternal company in the depths of the Appalachian wilderness. When he awoke, rescue teams were searching for him, drawn by his emergency beacon, but Evan knew the trail had changed him forever. The forest's curse was real, and some who enter its shadow never truly leave. Evan's mind struggled to piece together the fractured memories of those terrifying days. Though his body lay safely in a hospital bed back in town, his thoughts were still entangled in the dense Appalachian forest, the twisting trails, the chilling silence, the glowing amber eyes watching him from the shadows. The doctors called his experience a case of severe exhaustion and hallucinations brought on by dehydration and stress. But Evan knew the truth was far darker. The trail had a hold on him, and the whispering voices echoed in his dreams, refusing to fade. After his release, Evan found himself drawn back to the cabin he'd discovered. Despite warnings from locals, he rented a small cabin nearby and began to research the disappearances chronicled in the faded photographs and maps he had found. Each red X on the map told a story of a lost hiker, people who vanished without a trace. Their last known locations all clustered near that same stretch of the trail. Local legends spoke of the Watcher, a malevolent spirit guarding the wilderness and punishing those who dared to disturb its domain. Evan's nights were haunted by nightmares of endless forests and cold, amber eyes following his every move. One night, he awoke to find fresh carvings etched into his cabin's wooden door symbols, matching those he had seen on the trees. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as a cold wind swept through the room, carrying faint whispers calling his name, determined to break free. Evan sought the help of an old mountain guide named Mabel, who was said to possess knowledge of the trail's secrets and the rituals that could ward off the curse. Mabel told him that the forest was a living entity, nourished by grief and fear, feeding on the souls of the lost. To survive, Evan would have to confront the Watcher and offer a token of peace, something personal and sincere, that acknowledged the ancient power dwelling within the woods, armed with a small wooden carving of a deer, a symbol of life and respect. Evan prepared for a final journey into the heart of the forest. Guided by Mabel's instructions and his own unyielding will, he set out at dawn, the forest looming like a vast, indifferent cathedral. As he walked, the trees seemed to whisper warnings, and shadows flickered just beyond the reach of his senses. The air thickened, the temperature dropping with every step. But Evan pressed on. The wooden deer clutched tightly in his palm. At the clearing where he first saw the glowing eyes, he knelt and placed the carving on a stone altar, murmuring a heartfelt apology for trespassing and a promise to honor the wilderness. The air stilled, the oppressive weight lifting slightly suddenly. The amber eyes appeared once more, closer and clearer than ever. The Watcher's presence was overwhelming, an ancient force beyond human understanding. But instead of attack, the spirit's form softened, shifting into the shape of a majestic stag bathed in ethereal light. The stag bowed its head, accepting Evan's offering, and the whispers faded into a peaceful silence. Evan returned from the forest changed, not just a survivor, but a guardian of its secrets. Though the Appalachian Trail remained wild and unforgiving, the curse had lifted, if only for now. But as he looked back at the dense tree line, he knew the forest would always watch, waiting for the next soul to wander too far into its shadows.